Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Anatomy by Dr. Vijaya. Today's session will be the development of central nervous system. In my previous video, I had reviewed the process of neurulation and I had completed the development of spinal cord. So this is CNS Development Part 2 where I will be covering the development of mesencephalon, rhombencephalon, so which also includes the development of cerebellum. Now moving on to the brain development. So this we have I have already told there are three main vesicles, the primitive brain vesicles, forebrain, midbrain and hind brain. So forebrain is also called as prosencephalon, which will further subdivide into telein and diencephalon. Midbrain is called as a mesencephalon, and hind brain, which is called as rhombencephalon, will further subdivide into metencephalon and myelencephalon. Okay, so generally the brain is divided into brainstem, which includes mesencephalon, metencephalon and myelencephalon. So myelencephalon will give rise to medulla oblongata, meten will develop into pons, okay, and mesencephalon into midbrain. But there is other higher center in the brain which includes cerebellum, which develops from metencephalon, and the other higher center structures are cerebrum and the structures which are developing from the diencephalon. Okay, and along with the development of primitive brain vesicles, the dilatations, as I had mentioned, there will be two main flexures, which one is the cephalic and the cervical flexures. The cervical flexure is at the between developing spinal cord and the hind brain, and the cephalic flexure is at the level of mesencephalon. So these are the two flexures and the three primitive brain vesicles. Along with that, there will be formation of one more flexure which is at the dorsal aspect. Okay, that's called as a pontine flexure, which develops between the rhombencephalon. Okay, so it develops within the rhombencephalon, separating the pons and the medulla oblongata. So two flexures are seen over here. One is the cephalic, the other one is a cervical. So the other one develops at the level of rhombencephalon, so that's called as pontine flexure. Okay, so let us know about the development of the brainstem. So the brainstem has the same features of the spinal cord, because brainstem is the continuation of the spinal cord. Okay, so it has almost the same features of the spinal cord, especially the formation of alar plate and the basal plate, which we had learnt in the development of spinal cord. So alar plate mainly contributes for the sensory neurons, and basal plate mainly contributes for the development of motor neurons. So similarly, here also in the development of brainstem, that is mainly the myelencephalon, metencephalon and the mesencephalon, which are the parts of the brainstem. So there also you see the formation of basal plate and the alar plate from the neuroepithelial cells. Okay, so let us know about in detail about the rhombencephalon, the hind brain. So it consists of myelencephalon and metencephalon. Myelencephalon is the most caudal of the brain vesicles, which will give rise to medulla oblongata. Meten will give rise to cerebellum and pons. So as I mentioned, it has the same features of spinal cord. So two plates are formed due to the further addition of neuroblast cells, which are developing from neuroepithelial cells, which are lining the wall of the tube. Okay, so these alar and basal plates are separated by sulcus limitans. So even in the spinal cord, the sulcus limitans was present over here. Okay, so this was the alar plate, this was the basal plate, and here you can see the sulcus limitans, okay, which separates the two plates. And at the midline, there are another two plates over here, the roof plate and the floor plate. So there won't be any specialized neurons over there. There are just the association fibers which are connecting both the sides. Okay, this is mainly at the roof and the floor plate. So this is the sulcus limitans, which was seen in the developing spinal cord. So similarly, even in the brainstem, that is in the developing rhombencephalon. So the two plates are separated by sulcus limitans, and basal plate mainly contains the motor nuclei and alar plate mainly has a sensory nuclei. Okay, so if you can see here in the spinal cord, the alar plate was on the dorsal aspect and the basal plate was on the ventral aspect, but here there will be the lateral edges, especially in the rhombencephalon. The lateral edges of the rhombencephalon, they extend, they elongate laterally, so that's why you can see basal plate lying on the medial aspect and alar plate lying on the lateral aspect. So this is the only difference. So there it was on the ventral and the dorsal aspect, but here due to the elongation of the lateral edges of the rhombencephalon, so they lie besides, that is the basal plate mainly occupies the medial aspect and the alar plate on the lateral aspect, and here is the sulcus limitans which separates the two plates. Okay, so as I mentioned, basal plate mainly has the motor neurons, which includes, so according to their function, I think you have according to the function, these neurons are divided into three groups, three types. Okay, so the motor neurons, which are also called as efferent neurons, so they are basically divided into three groups, three types: general somatic, special visceral efferent, and general visceral efferent. Okay, so there is general somatic efferent. So these are the neurons, these are the nerves which mainly supplies the somatic striated muscles. Okay, the somatic skeletal muscles or somatic striated muscles. As you know that brainstem has nuclei of the cranial nerves. So the nerves which are developing from the spinal cord, they are called as spinal nerves, and the nerves which are coming from the brain, that is brain and the brainstem, the higher center and the brainstem, they are called as the cranial nerves. 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Among 12 pairs of cranial nerve, the first and second, that is olfactory and optic, they come from the higher centers, and the remaining one from 3rd to 12th, they have their nuclei present in the brainstem. Okay, so these are the nerves, the cranial nerves. So mainly, if you can see, 3rd, 4th, 6th and 12th, so they are categorized under general somatic efferent, because they mainly supply the skeletal muscles of the eyeball and skeletal muscles of the tongue. Okay, the extrinsic eye muscles, that is the eyeball muscles which help in the upward, downward and medial and lateral movement. Okay, so the eyeball muscles, so they are supplied by 3rd, 4th and 6th, that is oculomotor, trochlear and abducens. So they are categorized due to their function, they are categorized under general somatic, and hypoglossal also supplies the muscles of the tongue, so they are also categorized under general somatic efferent. Okay, so generally they supply the striated muscle, motor in function. So among these three cranial nerves, if you can see, the 12th cranial nerve is located, they originate, they have their nuclei in the myelencephalon, that is the developing medulla oblongata. Okay, the rest, if you can see, 6th one is from the metencephalon, that is from the pons, they have the nuclei in the pons. 3rd and 4th have their nuclei in the mesencephalon, that is midbrain. Okay, they say that there are some they say that the 4th, the trochlear nerve, initially they are present, they will be developing in the metencephalon, then they migrate to the mesencephalon. So there are some difference of opinion, but you can just remember 3rd and 4th have their nuclei in the developing midbrain, 6th one in the developing pons, and 12th in the developing medulla oblongata. So that's easier to remember. The next, so this is present in the medial most aspect of the basal plate. Okay, so medial most aspect of the basal plate. So if you can correlate with the gross feature of the brainstem, you can see hypoglossal nuclei is present in the most medial aspect. So I would like to show that the medullary section. So can you see here the hypoglossal nucleus over here? So the lateral edges have been elongated. So this is the basal plate having the motor neurons, and the most lateral most are the sensory neurons. So that's why you are seeing the hypoglossal nucleus is present. It is general somatic efferent. So they are present on the most medial aspect. Okay, the next is special visceral efferent. Okay, so why they are called as special? Because they mainly supply the striated muscles which are developing from the pharyngeal arches. Okay, so there are mainly the 6 pharyngeal arches. Among that, the fifth pharyngeal arch is rudimentary. Okay, from the rest of the pharyngeal arches, mainly the muscles of the pharynx, the facial muscles, all those develop. So the nerves, the cranial nerves which are supplying those muscles, striated muscles which are developing from pharyngeal arches, they are categorized under special visceral efferent. Okay, so which includes trigeminal, that is the mandibular division of trigeminal, which supplies the muscles which are developing from first pharyngeal arch. Then there is facial, which are supplying the muscles developing from second pharyngeal arch, and the rest of the arches, that is the pharyngeal muscles, the laryngeal muscles, so they are mainly supplied by glossopharyngeal and vagus. They are categorized under special visceral efferent. So among that, glossopharyngeal and vagus, that is mainly the dorsal nucleus of the vagus, they lie in the myelencephalon. They have their nuclei in the myelencephalon, which later develops into medulla oblongata. The 5th and the 7th cranial nerve have their nuclei in the mesencephalon, that which will later develop into pons. Okay, so they have their nuclei in the pons. Okay, then this is present in the intermediate. So this I am talking the basal plate. The most medial will be general somatic efferent. Then you have the special visceral efferent. Then in the basal plate, laterally you see the nuclei which have the function of general visceral efferent, that is parasympathetic innervation. You know that autonomic nervous system, there is sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic mainly arises from thoracolumbar region T1 to L2, and the parasympathetic innervation is craniosacral. Okay, so there are pelvic splanchnic nerves which are originating from the sacral area, supplies the pelvic viscera over there, and the rest of the parasympathetic innervation are coming from the cranial nerves. Okay, which includes oculomotor, facial, then vagus, that is the 10th cranial nerve, and glossopharyngeal. So they are categorized under general visceral efferent. They supply the smooth muscles and they have parasympathetic innervation. So among that, the third one have their nuclei in the developing midbrain, mesencephalon, and the rest, that is the 9th and 10th, is from myelencephalon. Okay, they also supply the salivary glands, the parotid, submandibular, sublingual glands. Okay, so and also the lacrimal glands and the nasal cavity glands. So all they are the parasympathetic innervation, they are categorized under general visceral efferent. So these are the 3 types of motor neurons which are present in the basal plate, okay, in the brainstem. Okay, next, so this is how the arrangement. So the basal plate over here, the motor neurons, they divide. So somatic efferent, so if this is a developing medulla oblongata, so somatic efferent is hypoglossal nerve. Special visceral efferent, that is pharyngeal arches, that is 9, 10, 11. Okay, glossopharyngeal, vagus, and accessory, the cranial accessory. Then the lateral will be general visceral efferent. Okay, general visceral efferent includes vagus and glossopharyngeal. So this is an example for a developing medulla oblongata. The next is the most lateral one is the alar plate. Again, alar plate has 3 groups of neurons. Okay, so the sensory neurons, alar plate mainly has sensory neurons, that is afferent neurons. So 3 groups are general visceral afferent, special afferent, and general somatic afferent. Okay, so general visceral afferent, the name only tells, it mainly supplies the visceras, the visceral pain. Okay, so they are mainly carried through these fibers. So it's mainly the visceral pain from the abdominal organs, okay, the GI tract, so which are carried mainly by the vagus nerve, so which are present in the developing medulla oblongata, myelencephalon. Special visceral afferent, or special afferent, so these carry special sensation which includes taste, hearing and balance. Okay, so these are special sensation. The taste is mainly carried by chorda tympani, which is a branch of facial nerve, mainly carries from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Posterior 1/3, the taste sensation is carried by glossopharyngeal. So that is present over the special afferent. Okay, so 7th is present at the metencephalon, developing pons, and 9th is in the medulla oblongata. Okay, hearing and balance is by vestibulocochlear. So they mainly the nuclei develop in the metencephalon, that is developing pons. The most lateral in the alar plate is general somatic afferent. So that is a general sensation of head and neck region. Okay, general sensation of the body area is carried by a tract. Okay, spinothalamic tract. Okay, that is pain, touch, temperature. They throughout the body, from the limbs, they are mainly carried by the spinothalamic tract. But from the head and neck region, so they are carried by the cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve. They are partly by the facial and partly by the glossopharyngeal. It's mainly by the trigeminal, but there are certain small areas carried by glossopharyngeal and facial nerve. So they are categorized under general somatic afferent. So their nuclei are mainly distributed in metencephalon and myelencephalon. So this is how the distribution of neurons in the brainstem. So here you can see, so this is developing pons. This is the developing medulla, which is from the myelencephalon. So this is the developing metencephalon, that is the pons. So you can see here, this is the basal plate, this is the alar plate. So you can see somatic efferent, that is the 6th abducens nerve. Then special visceral efferent, that is the mandibular division of trigeminal nerve and facial nerve, supplies the pharyngeal arches. Then general visceral efferent, okay, because some of the fibers might extend, it has to extend to the it has to come from the higher center. So some are might be present. So general visceral efferent includes the parasympathetic innervation. So even the facial nerve has parasympathetic innervation, mainly to the submandibular and sublingual gland. Then you have alar plate having general visceral afferent, special afferent and somatic afferent. Okay, so this is how the distribution takes place, develops in the brainstem. Okay, so this is a gross feature, the section of medulla, section of the pons. So you can correlate with the types of neurons which are present and how it develops. Now coming to the development of cerebellum. So cerebellum, though it is considered under higher center, it doesn't have the same features of spinal cord or same features of brainstem, because if you see gross feature in the spinal cord and the brainstem, you see gray matter at the center, white matter surrounding. But here in the cerebellum, since it is a part of the higher center, so it has gray matter at the outer aspect, outer cortex, and inner it has the white matter. Okay, so the cerebellum mainly develops from the metencephalon, which is a part of the rhombencephalon. Okay, at the dorsal aspect, you can see here, this is the rhombencephalon, that is the you can see this this is the developing pons over here, the metencephalon. At the dorsal aspect, dorsolateral parts of the alar plates, so they slightly bend to form a lip called as rhombic lip. So you can see here, so if a section is taken over here and see from the dorsal aspect, okay, so this is the developing pons. At the dorsolateral aspect of the metencephalon, so there will be small elevation which will be facing towards medially. So it will be moving towards medially. Okay, so these two are the rhombic lip. Okay, they are called as rhombic lips. Okay, which later further develops into cerebellum. Okay, so once these rhombic lips are formed on the dorsal lateral parts of the alar plate of the metencephalon, so there will be further deepening of the pontine flexure. So if you can see here, so there will be further deepening of the pontine flexure. So due to this deepening of the pontine flexure, so the rhombic lips which are formed, so they compress on the cephalocaudal area. Okay, so these lips are formed. If you can see over here, the lips are present over here. Okay, on the cranial aspect they are little bit closer compared to the caudal aspect. So due to the further deepening of the pontine flexure, so these rhombic lips, they come closer and they compress at the cephalocaudal direction. Okay, so aspect, so at the cephalocaudal aspect they compress each other, and that forms a cerebellar plate. Okay, so due to the compression of these rhombic lips will lead into the formation of cerebellar plate. So at around 12 week of if you see the development of the embryo, so this plate will have a center which is the vermis, which is at the midline. On either side there will be developing lateral portion which are the cerebellar hemispheres. Okay, so here you can see, so this is the plate. So due to the deepening of the pontine flexure, so they are approaching at the cephalocaudal direction, so they compress each other, and this leads to the formation of cerebellar plate. So at midline there will be a vermis, and there will be further growth of the lateral aspect, so that's called as a cerebellar hemisphere. Okay, so as the development progresses, there will be formation of a fissure. Okay, so that's called as a transverse fissure. Okay, so this fissure, this is the primary fissure. So if you can see the gross feature of the cerebellum, so it has different fissures. The deepest one are the horizontal fissure. Then you have primary fissure which separates the anterior lobe from the posterior lobe. Then you have the rest of the cerebellum is separated from the floccular nodular lobe by one more fissure, which is the posterior lateral fissure which is present on the inferior aspect. So there will be further formation of fissures and further development of the cerebellum. So how there will be further development of these fissures? So this is due to the formation of different neuronal cells. So initially when you see the cerebellar plate, they consist of neuroepithelial layer which is near to the lumen, then the mantle layer and the marginal layer. So if you can see over here, so this bold line 1 represents the neuroepithelial layer, then it has a mantle layer and the marginal layer. So this is initially. So later what happens, the neuroepithelial layer, since they have the capacity to divide and migrate, the cells from the neuroepithelial layer, they directly migrate towards the surface of the cerebellum. So here you can see the cells which have the capacity to divide and differentiate, so they directly move to the surface of the cerebellum. So that's why in the cerebellum you see gray matter at the outer cortex and white matter at the inner aspect. Okay, so the neuroepithelial layer migrate towards the surface to form a layer called as external granular layer. Okay, so the red one represents the external granular layer. So at around 6th month of development, this external granular layer will give rise to different cell types which are present in the cerebellum. That is the cerebellar cortex, outer cerebellar cortex, which includes Purkinje cells, then Golgi organs, then you can see molecular layer, then the inner granular layer. So you can also see basket cells, stellate cells. So all these cells develop from this external granular layer. Okay, so that's why in the cerebellum at the surface you see the gray matter having different types of neurons. Okay, and inner there will be white matter, which are nothing but the fibers of these neurons. Okay, but since some of the neuroepithelial cells which are present here, so this will later there will be formation of even the innermost neurons, which are the dentate, globus fastigial nucleus. So these will develop within the inner white matter area. So this is how the cerebellum develops at the metencephalon that is the metencephalon contributes, the ventral aspect contributes for the development of pons, and dorsolateral aspect contributes for the development of cerebellum. The mesencephalon, which will develop into midbrain, so similarly it has alar plate and the basal plate. Okay, so here the sulcus, you can see there will be elongation of sulcus limitans. So this will has the alar plate on the dorsal aspect and the basal plate at the ventral aspect. Okay, so in the basal plate, as I mentioned earlier, which has the motor neurons. So in the developing pons and medulla oblongata, the basal plate will have three groups of or three types of motor neurons, that is special visceral efferent, then general visceral efferent, and general somatic efferent. But here in the basal plate of the developing midbrain has only two groups, that is the if you can see here that it has only the general somatic efferent and the general visceral efferent. So it doesn't have any neurons which comes under special visceral efferent. So in the basal plate of developing mesencephalon, so it has only two groups of neurons, that is general somatic efferent, which will mainly give rise to oculomotor and trochlea. Then it has general visceral efferent, that is mainly the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which mainly contributes, which is mainly from the oculomotor nerve, the parasympathetic innervation to the sphincter pupillae. Okay, so that those neurons are present in the mesencephalon. Alar plate is present on the dorsal aspect. So if you can see the alar plate, they divide in, they form two longitudinal ridges over here. Okay, they separate into two longitudinal dilatation or ridges, and later these two ridges will form the colliculus. Okay, so you see the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. Okay, the superior colliculus mainly gets connected with the visual pathway, and the inferior colliculus will have connection with the auditory pathway. So there are four in total. There are four in number. Okay, two on the superior aspect, two on the inferior aspect. So they are mainly developing from the alar plate of the mesencephalon. So in my next video, I will be covering the development of prosencephalon. Thank you for watching.